This is intended to be a state of the game discussion around Pinto. And I think it's quite an apropos title because in many ways, Pinto is a game. And the game is designed to encourage particular behavior that results in the creation of value, which is quite an interesting idea that through the rules of the game, that the game itself can start to accrue value by people playing the game. Very interesting. And, or at least very interesting to me. And where we currently sit, Pinto is almost 4 months old, which is quite a while in crypto land, and approaching like the half age of Beanstalk up until the exploit. And we thought it would be a good use of time to just talk about what we're seeing and how we interpret a lot of what we're seeing and how it affects our thoughts about the model and the potential for the model. So, in particular, want to encourage any of the contributors to come up and share their perspective on any particular piece of the model, and want to encourage people to ask questions throughout this call about any particular piece of the model and how it's performing. But maybe to kick things off, the protocol is hanging out in the 80s, in the 80 cents range. And the glass half empty take on this is that the price has not generally been oscillating across its value target almost at all. And there have been some periods of time, certainly, where the price has basically been at its value target. But we've started to see extended periods of time where the price deviates quite heavily and it does not repeg immediately. And on this front, and we'll try to get to doing analysis on the liquidity and the debt level and all that stuff. But even just on price, there really is so much that we can learn about the health of the system through the price action. Now, an overlay into the data that we're receiving about how the participants in the system are performing is the protocol does have significant exposure to the broader crypto market in the form of the LP tokens that are deposited in the silo. And at the moment, the vast majority of the exposure of Pinto to the general crypto market is to non-stablecoin. There's almost no stablecoin exposure. And so the result is that there is some natural effect that the general movement of the crypto market has on the Pinto price. And in some sense, or in many senses, in fact, a helpful mental model for this is the game of Pinto is played on top of the broader crypto market movement, where when the crypto market is growing significantly, that is a major tailwind for the protocol, and the conditions under which it has to operate are tremendously different in a market where the prices of crypto are going down significantly. And so even in the context of analyzing raw price changes and how what we can learn about the ecosystem or about the protocol from the price movement itself, we do at some level have to try, and it's an imperfect science here, but try to bifurcate. And maybe it could be a perfect science with all the data, but getting the right data is very, very hard. We have to bifurcate the general movement of the crypto market and how that affects Pinto and the activity of the participants in the system, if that makes sense. So if we start with this meta perspective, talking about price, and I think we're getting a little mic feedback from somebody. It might be Harry Smith. Harry, are you unmuted? Do you have something to say, Harry? I'm still waiting to hear from Harry one day. All right. Well, in the meantime, if people pick up on the mic feedback as well, maybe we can try to figure out who that is. We digress. So the price, as we were saying, has deviated quite substantially from the value target down into the 80s, the 70s, and even the high 60s. And these have been generally new low points in the price for Pinto. Now, I think it's helpful to contextualize the price action with what an understanding of what the protocol actually wants. So it's sort of a given with systems like Pinto that they run in cycles. And so what we can generally expect is that there is a growth cycle where the market generally views the protocol as undervalued. Or it could be that in a non-speculative sense, there's just more demand for the protocol. But where we're at today, there's not a lot of exogenous utility. There's mostly just speculation. So the circumstance for the early cycles are that the market generally views the protocol as underpriced and small relative to its potential size. And so people start to buy in and drive the price up above its value target. And through driving the price up above its value target, the positive feedback loop starts, whereby the seigniorage from the mints that are designed to bring the price down are distributed to creditors in the field and depositors in the silo. And the growth in the yield that people can receive for holding Pinto generally has a very positive feedback loop, where the higher the yield, the more people are willing to buy and hold Pinto in order to earn that yield. The more demand for Pinto, the more Pinto gets printed, and the cycle continues for a little while. And then it ends. Now, the really interesting parts of the system, or at least to me, some of the most interesting parts of the system, are the mechanisms that are at play around what to do when the music stops. And I think we can learn a lot about the state of the protocol based on how the price action has been relative to the ideal price action that the protocol would want. So if we think about and look at the data, obviously in the first couple weeks of the protocol, there was a tremendous growth, where the protocol started at a supply of like 100, I believe, and within a couple weeks had grown to 18 million. Now, where we currently sit with the market cap at about 9.8 million, it's clear that minting 18 million Pinto was in excess of the, let's call it the stable level of demand, or the consistent level of demand for the currency. So it seems that a significant amount of the minting was in excess of that organic demand. Maybe it would be a better way to call it. And the result of minting 7 million or potentially even more. I guess 18 million, we're now at 10 million market cap approximately, so 8 million, but on the order of 2x the supply that there was organic demand for. There obviously was an ensuing supply overhang and an ensuing dip in the price of the protocol. So really interesting to see was that after this initial growth cycle, the protocol actually did a really strong job of maintaining its price at its value target for quite a while. And I think this is really helpful data to try to understand, in the sense that particularly the first cycle, in all likelihood, that is like the best time to get in, even if you don't care about the protocol or don't believe in the protocol, just because it's so small, right? The initial pump, there was like a pump from 0 to like 5 million supply approximately, but then there was a huge pump from 5 million to 18 million. And that run up from 5 million to 18 million is sort of, from a risk return perspective, the supply is 3.5xing over a couple days. Hard to think of a better time to be in the protocol. And so one of the first things that we would look at is, did the protocol, was it able to minimize to the extent possible the inorganic demand that came in and the minting as a result of inorganic demand? And, you could say, well, market cap's at 10 mil, the protocol minted up to 18 mil, so it minted basically double what there was demand for, or organic demand for. But I think we have to put this in perspective, which is to say that with Beanstalk, the first cycle, the first real pump, went from 4 million to 40 million, and happened in a similar very short period of time, but the flood mechanism was significantly less complex. The convert mechanism didn't exist at the time, and the result was that the price went as high as $4 and then crashed to 24 cents. And this type of volatility was really exclusively the result of this natural early opportunity to get into the protocol, combined with a lack of breaks that the protocol could sufficiently hit. And of course, the protocol isn't necessarily hitting the breaks itself, as opposed to incentivizing other people and participants to hit the breaks. But nonetheless, the existence of converts seems to have had a really tremendous effect on the health of the system. And so if we look at the liquidity levels during this initial pump, the liquidity went from something like 7 million to 28 million of liquidity against an 18 million supply. And that L2SR of, I think, in the high 60s or even 70s, in many ways is the reason why the protocol has not had a collapse in the price to 24 cents or something like it, a la what happened to Beanstalk during its first cycle. And at the same time, you could look at the current liquidity levels and say, well, the protocol is down to 4 million of liquidity from a high of 28 million liquidity. It seems like the thing is bleeding out, that it's lost 80+% of the liquidity in the system. This doesn't feel very sustainable. However, the way I look at it is that the more liquidity that was accrued directly through converts that also minimized the minting. So it wasn't just that you had sort of an over, the L2SR that the protocol targets is 40%. To have the L2SR get up to 80% is generally not particularly capital efficient. However, during a monumental pump, it's great that the protocol was able to attract so much liquidity. And it's great that as people left after the initial pump and we saw tens of millions of dollars of demand leave the system, that the liquidity was ultimately able to do its job and basically fill in a lot of the gap such that we didn't have any sort of collapse in the Pinto price, or a major collapse in the Pinto price. So to me, it's very encouraging to see that the way that converts were implemented and the flood worked as intended generally, which is to say that the mints were minimized to the extent possible. It's unclear how to draw an exact comparison with Beanstalk in terms of Beanstalk pumped from 4 million to 40 million, and then it sort of collapsed down to 24 cents, which would mean maybe like a market cap of 10 million, which is similar to where Pinto's at, which kind of makes sense. But the point is, the protocol minted double. Beanstalk minted double compared to Pinto and under similar circumstances. And the result of having the conversions was that the protocol minted a lot less, and there was a lot more value in the protocol for people that wanted to leave after the exit. So this part, particularly the handling of the first pump, was quite encouraging to me. Now, I think where things on the price front in particular get really interesting to analyze is what happened, for example, when there was a dump of like $1 million of value or so. And at the time, if I recall correctly, the Pinto price, and I'm looking at the charts here to try to confirm, the Pinto price was hanging out in the mid 90s. And upon someone exiting with $1 million of value or so, the price collapsed into the high 70s. And what we saw thereafter was really interesting. We saw a significant amount of conversions up, where the price, I think, got, and I'm looking at the chart, it doesn't have it exactly, but I think the price got pretty close to 90 cents again. And then there was, I think, another exit or another series of outflows from the protocol combined with this downturn in the crypto market that led to the price to come down to around 70 cents or slightly below it. And this, in many ways, has been the biggest test of the protocol to date. It was the first major depeg. Obviously, oscillating in the 90s is a totally different ball game than the price collapsing down to 70 cents or 69 cents. And to see a couple different factors at play has been very interesting and worth talking about a little bit more. So one is the converts, that the conversions have generally proven to be the best tool that the protocol has, and maybe best is the word, but the most practical tool that the protocol has been able to use to incentivize participants to effectively move the Pinto price back to the value target. And I think it really can't be overstated how the absence of converts during Beanstalk's first 4 months or so really left the protocol in a different circumstance in terms of the volatility of the price and also the amount of debt that it had to issue. And so I think and I know we've been talking about conversions and the amount of liquidity quite a lot thus far on this call, but really just want to highlight that from my perspective, the conversions have been incredibly high efficacy to date. Now, two places that I think over the past month or so, we've gotten a lot of really great information about where the protocol perhaps is not as fine-tuned as it otherwise could be, is with the demand for soil or lack thereof, and the relative impact of upward conversions versus downward conversions. So to start with the soil, one of the big open questions for a system like Pinto is how can it create the best conditions under which it can borrow from the market. And we would define best conditions by basically creating a market structure that would allow for the protocol to borrow the most amount of money for the lowest interest rates possible. And creating game theory to make that the case is quite complicated. So historically, the primary feature that has been used to create these conditions whereby, like, the goal ultimately is to incentivize the behavior that as soon as the protocol is willing to offer a certain interest rate in the field, such that I, as a potential creditor, look at that interest rate and look at the length of the pod line and say, this is a good enough risk return for me to lend to the protocol. The optimal setup for the field would be that at the very instant that those conditions are met, that, or maybe that one condition is met, that I feel like the risk return is worth it for me, I'm going to lend to the protocol. And the first in, first out payment schedule for pods is a really core element of this, creating this market structure, where the fact that the pod line is paid first in, first out, there is a risk that if you wait, because what is the behavior of that marginal lender? Like, they say it's worth the risk return, but they have a trade-off. Do they wait for the temperature to go higher, or do they act now? And risk, if they wait for it to go higher, do they risk the length of the pod line getting longer, someone else stepping in front of them, and the date at which they are paid back get pushed back? So the baseline decision is, do I think that it's worth the risk of someone getting in front of me in order to get a higher interest rate? And therefore, basically, if we look at the way that the field has functioned, on the one hand, you could say, the amount of debt has increased quite a lot over the past couple months. The Pinto supply has come down 7 million or so, almost 50%, which indicates tremendous efficacy in the field and the ability for the field to remove Pinto from the supply. The reality is that the interest rate that the protocol has had to pay is quite high from my perspective. I think the numbers are right now that on average, Pinto has paid something like 4.5 pods for every Pinto it's removed from the market. And particularly given the small size of Pinto, that doesn't feel great. Like, at its small scale, is Pinto likely going to be able to grow to pay back all this debt? From where we sit, that seems totally plausible, very reasonable. However, if Pinto goes through another cycle, grows to 100 million or so, and then has to pay 4.5 pods for every Pinto that it wants to remove from the supply, and it has to remove 50 million Pinto from the supply, assuming that it mints 2x what the organic demand level is again, and obviously there's no way to know what that level will be in advance, the protocol may have to issue $250 million of debt, which again it's potentially sustainable, but the goal is to minimize the amount that the protocol has to pay in order to borrow from the market and remove Pinto from the supply. And so one of the most interesting changes, arguably in the history Pinto and the history of Beanstalk is just went live a couple days ago, which is that the amount of soil that is available in the field is now a fraction of the soil that was available previously. Now, the arc here is quite interesting and powerful. When Beanstalk originally launched, the soil was cumulative across seasons. And so if the protocol was below peg by 100,000 over multiple consecutive seasons, the protocol would actually issue an additional 100,000 soil for every season that went by that the protocol did not repeg itself. And this led to adverse conditions twofold. One, that once the protocol did repeg itself, there was a huge overhang of soil that then led to the protocol issuing a lot of debt that it did not need to. But more relevant to the discussion that I want to have right now, the fact that there was so much soil generally made it such that the marginal lender was more inclined to keep waiting to see what would happen, because in reality, the risk return, there may be some cost from someone getting in front of you in line, in the pod line, but there's also a tremendous benefit, which is that through seeing other people lend, there's a lot more data that the marginal lender gets about the likelihood that they get paid back. So the result of having way too much soil is that it actually acts as a tremendous disincentive for people to lend to the protocol as soon as they feel like the risk return is good enough to lend, that the potential to wait to get more data in the form of seeing other people act with very low relatively opportunity cost to waiting ultimately made it that people were not particularly incentivized to lend to the protocol. And originally with Beanstalk, the change was made to, instead of having a cumulative amount of soil, to just have it based on the delta B over the previous season. And there was also a cap put in place relative to the supply. And this improved the efficacy of the field a bit, in particular in terms of minimizing the amount of instances where the protocol issued too much debt after it was already repegged. That was a big improvement. But in terms of this, marginal lender and the situation that they found themselves in, there was still too much soil to really create the optimal conditions for the market to lend to the protocol as soon as the marginal lender's conditions were met, such that they thought the risk return was sufficient. And I think the downside of this has manifested in the temperature going way too high. That because there's so much soil, and therefore there's also an incentive for people to sort of wait to sow, that ultimately people were not sowing. And I've spoken to many people that, maybe many is a strong word, but I've spoken to enough people that suggested that the fact that there was so much soil is actually a call. My belief is that this has led to the protocol issuing basically raising the temperature too high. And so this week, a quite profound change was made in the field, in particular to the amount of soil that is available in the field, where now the amount of soil available every season is a fraction of the soil that was available previously. And I think the result is already manifest. We're in the morning auction right now, and it doesn't appear that there's any available soil, which is pretty cool. Oh, now it says there's 165 remaining soil. I just did a little refresh. But the point independent of any conclusions we can draw from the first couple days of data, might have been jumping the gun a little bit there, is that through the data that has been received watching the protocol operate, that we were able to make a change to the model, which the soil being issued is really just one parameter, like based on the delta B, the debt level, and the L2SR, how to issue the right amount of soil. This is just, it's not an overall like change to the model or the mechanism in which it operates, but just through changing the amount of soil and nothing else. We believe there to be great potential to dramatically improve the efficacy of the field and the ability for the protocol to issue debt at a more reasonable rate and remove Pinto from the supply in a more sustainable fashion. And what this kind of gets back to, or what we should get back to in this context, is converts. So what we've seen so far is a significant efficacy during the big pump for converts down that minimize the growth of the supply. And then as a result of all those converts down, there was an excess liquidity that was used to allow for most people who wanted to exit at very close to the value target, which leads to a tremendous improvement in utility for the system. However, if people recall, for those that were there, the Beanstalk State Space series of calls from a while back, the PEG maintenance mechanism really has a quite interesting design space or trade-off space in which it operates, where in a perfect setting, assuming that all the incentives were ideal, such that the protocol could generally choose whether or not at the margin it would prefer to issue more debt in order to preserve liquidity, or basically go closer to the value target through conversions, which sacrifices liquidity, but to the benefit of having less debt issued. Having the field be significantly more efficient really should give the model a lot more power to choose. And there's an open question as to how the protocol can really deliberately choose. One, make the choice, and then two, create incentives to manifest its choice. Really open, maybe not entirely open, but an interesting and open place for conversation. I think the change in the field is really going to have a potentially really positive effect on the protocol's ability to pick and choose, independent of the way in which it's picking and choosing. Just having a significantly less amount hopefully will create a new incentive structure that allows the protocol to borrow a lot more efficiently, both in terms of time that it takes the protocol to borrow and the interest rate that it's paying. And maybe to break down why this change in the field is so profound from where I sit. It's like, I may want to lend, I may view the risk return at the current pod line length and temperature to be sufficient for me to lend. But if there's a couple 100,000 soil, as there was just a few days ago, from where I sit, what are the odds that someone comes in and market bids us to PEG and sows all of the Pinto? Like, pretty low. What's much more likely is that people will sow in small amounts, 10K, 5K, 50K, even 100K, and I will still be able to, having now received all this new information, still get in line and get in line at a very similar temperature. Whereas now that the soil is 4,000, 5,000 or so per season on the upper end, I no longer have that luxury, or I no longer have the same luxury with minimal risk where risk in this case is defined as losing the ability to get in line, still get in line after getting all this data. And the reason why is now that there's so much less soil in the field, it's unlikely that most market participants, once their threshold is met, are going to be able to sow everything that they want to sow in a single season. And so what's more likely to happen is, even though through issuing less soil, it may take the protocol longer to repeg itself if it were only repegging itself from straight demand. The result is now when someone acts and sows effectively all of the soil in a season, the next season, now the competition is on. Like, oh, wow, people are starting to get in line, so much so that last season I couldn't get in line even if I wanted. Now I have to think about, okay, like at the start of the next season, during the morning auction of the next season, am I willing to bid a temperature that is maybe slightly less than the maximum temperature in order to make sure that I am able to get in line? And maybe what will happen is people will wait until the very end of the morning auction and see whether they'll be able to still get in at the max temp. But if there's some marginal sower that has started to sow, the max in multiple consecutive seasons, pretty soon you can expect other people to say, hey, I don't know how much this guy's going to sow. I don't know how far back in line that's going to put me. I don't know how low the temperature is going to get as a result of them continuously sowing every season. I probably got to get in line to the extent that I do want to get in line. And so while there is still a question as to the trigger to start this snowball, if you will, you still need someone to pull the first trigger and fire the first bullet and sow in a season. At the same time, the threshold that would have to be met in order for a positive feedback loop in the field to get started has been reduced dramatically. Like at 250,000 soil, which again, there was that much soil as recently as this week. Like you need a whale to come in and have $500,000 or more to come play with to really make an impact in the dynamics of the field, where people start to actually change their behavior based on other people's activity. Whereas through minimizing or significantly decreasing the amount of soil that is available, now totally different market circumstances are created, where now someone's sowing even 5,000 2 seasons in a row. So for 10,000 Pinto, you have the potential to start a positive feedback loop. And it feels a lot more tangible that the field will be able to, in a significant way, to contribute to Pinto's repegging or achieving its value target again in a sustainable fashion. And perhaps it's worth commenting on like the primary insight that led us to where we are now, which is that the protocol in general, and this is related to the conversation we were having in the stablecoin trilemma convo a few days ago. It's like the trade-off space has to be trading off volatility for sustainability. That's the trade. And so the more that the model is willing to trade short-term volatility for long-term sustainability, that is a good trade every time. So in this case, the trade-off is as follows. Instead of the protocol trying to sort of hit a home run and return to peg immediately or close to immediately, that instead it's happy to make a slow march back to its value target. And that slow march will likely lead to being able to borrow at lower interest rates and likely having to borrow less overall. Because if people see that the protocol is repegging and there is a snowball in the field, that they may jump the gun and jump in and deposit in the silo, for example. Now, I think enough said on this front for now. The other topic that I mentioned I wanted to talk about and maybe I'll do it slightly more briefly, is the other change or the other significant change that went out, not that went out, but is going to go out soon, around a penalty for converting down to the value target when the price is above its value target instantly. So if we think about trading volatility for long-term sustainability, this is one where personally I don't know exactly where to come out on this trade-off. But there's been significant discussion around the idea that when the protocol is at its value target, that there is an excess downward price pressure through conversions. And that right now, particularly after a down cycle like Pinto has been going through, where a significant amount of the participants of the system have converted their Pinto LP exposure to Pinto exposure, that there is a significant demand to convert down. And the result of such a significant incentive to convert down, the result is that the protocol really has a tremendous uphill battle before it in terms of starting the next growth cycle. So Pinto is something that is highly cyclical and is designed to minimize the extent of its cycles. But there's an open question as to kicking off the next cycle. And is it possible, you look at the state of Pinto right now, it's at 88 cents. It seems to be on the tail end of its first major cycle, where it grew quite significantly. It had major outflows. Liquidity levels came down. Price went down to high 60s, low 70s. But it seems to generally be on the up and up. There's an open question that is actively being discussed whether or not it is better for the protocol to just hang out around its value target and basically do nothing for a period of time until it is able to convince new market participants that this thing is sufficiently low volatility that it has great potential, and new demand comes in through that, through that thesis, if you will, through a thesis that is founded in the performance of the protocol, versus basically creating a disincentive for people that are holding Pinto to convert into Pinto LP immediately upon the crossing of the value target. And the what this would generally look like, and we expect it to look like, is for a period of, maybe 5 seasons, maybe 24 seasons, there will be a penalty enforced pro rata as a function of how much time the protocol has spent above its value target, where we can sort of parameterize this to be, when the protocol increases, when the price of the money crosses its value target, that the protocol actually wants the price to stay above its value target for a period of time. And through staying above its value target for a period of time, actually creating mints, not artificially. I think artificial is the wrong word. But in a way that the protocol has to date never done before, or this would be sort of the first instance in which it is expressing some preference to grow, as opposed to simply a preference to oscillate across its value target. Such a penalty for converting LP above the value target is an expression of a preference from the protocol to actually grow, in the hopes that through issuing some seniorage, as a result of disincentivizing converts downward, the protocol will be able to kickstart another growth cycle and grow its way out of its current predicament. I must express personally great reticence at subscribing to this theory. I feel as though by far the safer bet is for the protocol to only care about its value target and not care about its growth at all. But I am also interested in observing what a change like this has in terms of its effect on people's actions. And I'm very interested in observing whether people still have such a strong desire to convert Pinto to LP such that they do it and realize convert penalty. My instinct is that they will not convert nearly as much, given that there's a penalty. And, as a second order effect, whether or not creating this disincentive to convert will lead to more mints, which I assume it will. And then it's like, well, if there's more mints, is it healthy? Are the mints actually leading to new demand entering and staying in the system? Or is it just that it's creating more seigniorage at a time where it really shouldn't? And that's leading to more outflows from the protocol. So this is where I feel like the nature of experimentation is really important. And given that it feels like there's so many places where the protocol is still far from optimal, that this is a very intriguing, albeit a bit frightening, change to make, where we're going to get to learn a lot more about the incentives at play here and the preferences of the users that are playing the game. So I've been talking for quite a while, a bit of a brain dump. There is so much more to talk about. And personally, I'm quite excited to be back in the Discord, hanging out regularly, just talking about this. It's something we're very proud of and recognize the need to talk a lot more about it. So excited to be here and eager to continue discussing any and all things related to Pinto. But want to open up the floor briefly to see if there's some questions about what I've spoken about so far, or maybe some other element of the state of the game. And yeah, the floor is open. You gotta unmute, unserver mute Harry. What a tease, Harry. What a tease. Come on, folks. You gotta have some questions.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sweet. Hey, Ben. So I have a question that I'm curious to hear your perspective on. It's regarding the efficacy of the field and how a lot of the sows that we've seen have been from farmers just like withdrawing off of their silo positions to sow with, as opposed to buying Pinto on the market to sow. And I guess like the key distinction there being that those sows are not directly affecting the Pinto price, in the sense that at the time they occur, there's not like a market, like a corresponding market buy. And just like to contrast that with Beanstalk, where there was a withdrawal window from the silo, which largely mitigated that behavior, because when there was soil available, you could initiate a withdraw, but you wouldn't be able to just withdraw and then sow immediately. So yeah, curious your thoughts on that.
That's a great question, and arguably an even better PFP you have, sir. I like it. So the protocol really doesn't have a choice here. At the end of the day, if the field is offering a sufficiently attractive risk return, it's highly likely that many participants and holders of Pinto will simply want to lend the Pinto to the protocol. And from where I sit, the real task at hand is for the protocol to remove Pinto from the supply. So even if it may feel less effective than a buy and sow, right? Obviously, buys and sows are like the holy grail for the field, where new capital is entering, bidding up the price of Pinto, and then immediately being burned in the hopes of a future return. Like, that's obviously the best. However, the the reality is that the field is in competition with the silo. And there's really nothing that the protocol can do aside from some sort of like withdrawal limit, if you will, or withdrawal time, excuse me, to make it such that this is not the case. I would argue that even with Beanstalk, even though there was this like some slight time risk that the protocol might repeg such that there wouldn't be enough soil and then you just burn all your stock. In my mind, that was never a dominant incentive structure at play. And the reality is the protocol should be generally just as happy to remove Pinto from the silo as buys and sows. And I get it. Buys and sows are better. I would prefer that. But it really, the protocol should be able to borrow Pinto by removing it from the silo just as well. And I would argue that two things. One, it may be that in order to get the Pinto from the silo, that people convert their LP to Pinto and that moves the price up, and then they withdraw their Pinto and sow the Pinto. And so there's certainly a circumstance where obviously that doesn't have the same effect as a buy and sow. But in that way, the field, even through competing with the silo, is able to contribute to peg maintenance. And we don't necessarily see that so directly, or I don't think the analytics that we currently have make it so easy to see that may be going on, or it may not be going on. But generally, that's a dynamic at play in this competition between the field and the silo. And the other element of it is there is no, like the Pinto being removed from the silo is very healthy. Ultimately, there is an excess supply. And even if the removal of supply from the open market, not even the LP, but just straight Pinto from the silo, even if that doesn't have any direct effect on the price of the protocol, I would argue in many ways it does improve the health of the protocol, that there is an excess supply and the supply is coming down. And perhaps most importantly, that Pinto cannot be sold. So it's like, at 18 million Pinto supply, there's 18 million Pinto that can be sold on the market. At 11 million Pinto supply, there's 7 million Pinto less that can be sold, even in theory. And from this perspective, the system is much healthier, even if the price was not impacted at all from the perspective of people buying and sowing to bring the price up. I think there's a very good argument made that removing Pinto from the silo and having it, or incentivizing behavior that causes people to remove Pinto from the silo and burn it, likely does result in less downward price pressure at some point or another. So that's sort of how I think about it.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for talking through that.
I have a question.
Hit me.
You mentioned that you guys are thinking about implementing a mechanism of disincentivizing convert downwards, so like penalizing convert downwards as a function of like several things, one of which I thought I heard time spent above peg, but what else are you guys thinking?
Well, generally, it's just the state of the protocol. So downstream of the Beanstalk state space discussion from a while back, the protocol is now optimizing around not just price and debt level, but also liquidity level, L2SR. And so the short answer is the state of the protocol, which is the delta B, the debt level, and the liquidity level, in addition to time above peg.
Okay. And then the penalty amount do you guys have the math for that yet, or not? Not yet to determine like X the penalty amount.
I think if you go in the protocol channel under the kitchen,
Mm-hmm.
there is a hold on, I'm gonna bump it.
Okay, cool.
There's an attachment of a proposed function. I think L here is L2SR. So this is the latest. It seems like this proposed equation does not even consider debt level. So it seems to only consider price and liquidity level. I would argue that potentially a more sophisticated algorithm could also factor in the debt level. But this seems to be directionally what people are thinking.
I see. And in terms of converting upwards, that you're not going to change anything because the incentive of converting upwards is one contributing to peg maintenance, but also buying being at a cheaper price. Is that correct?
Pinto.
Pinto, sorry.
It's all right, man. I've made that mistake. Generally, yes. Definitely not thinking that it makes sense to implement a penalty for converting up. But
I was talking more about like a reward in addition.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So the idea of a convert bonus has been explored, and this was something originally that we didn't think was really possible, because if you're going to offer a bonus for converting from A to B and you already hold B, but you can get a bonus of grown stock in excess of the grown stock that you already have on your B deposit, that there's this perverse incentive to withdraw, sell your B into A, deposit your A, and then convert A to B to get more grown stock without doing anything. And so originally there was this hurdle around a bonus. But basically this I think speaks to the quality of the brains that are currently thinking about Pinto and taking the model further. There was an idea put forward to limit participation in a convert bonus to older deposits, such that this incentive is no longer the case. Where even with a bonus, you'd basically come out on the negative end for doing the behavior that I just specified. So I can't tell you the exact timeline on a convert bonus, but it is in the works. And the result should be that in conjunction with the change in the field, where there's now a lot less soil, the hope is between this soil snowball or the field snowball and a convert bonus that could, like the way we're trying to architect that, should be to also create a snowball in the silo via converts. Our hope is to create a significantly more sophisticated game theory that should give the protocol significantly more power in terms of its ability to create activity, be it lending or be it converting, and also then give it the power to choose whether to convert, to incentivize converts or incentivize loans, if that makes sense. So yeah, getting a little ahead of ourselves here, Rabbi, but like where your head is at.
Okay, it makes sense. And in terms of I'm still thinking of the reward here for converting up. Shouldn't there be also an incentive to convert upwards as soon as possible? Meaning like a reward based on how fast you convert up, right? Like, you want to basically incentivize people to, as soon as the price is below peg, to convert upwards, right? So that we spend the minimum time below peg. Is that considered also?
So I actually disagree with that thesis. I think this goes back to the trade-off space around short-term volatility for long-term sustainability, where in some sense, if the protocol desperately wants to stay close to its value target for as long as possible, that is likely going to lead to overpaying when people leave the system. So there's a really interesting trade-off space here around utility, where the utility of Pinto as a currency is maximized as a result of there being almost no downside volatility. So if the only thing being optimized for is utility, you could make or at least utility as a result of stability. There's an argument to be made that the protocol is best off just max incentivizing to the extent possible. But the school of thought that I am a part of believes that a couple things are true. One, when people are leaving the protocol and cashing out, it's generally in the best interest of that they get the worst price possible. This is not really the case when things are stable and hunky-dory and the system is in a sort of an equilibrium oscillating above and below its value target. But it is definitely the case from where I sit after a big pump. And there is a tremendous benefit to the long-term viability of the system to having some people leave well below the value target and sell their Pinto at a discount. Basically, if you're selling your Pinto at 70 cents instead of selling your Pinto at $1, on the one hand, that decreases the utility for you as a user of Pinto. And the risk that happens can happen to you when you want to leave definitely does hurt the utility of Pinto as a currency. But to that, I would say, don't leave during the bank run. Like, you want to leave during normal conditions. Absolutely, the protocol wants to be at its value target during most conditions. But in the circumstance where it has just depegged and people are starting to exit, the protocol actually really doesn't want to return to its value target instantly. In fact, the protocol likely wants, and I use want here in a bit of an ambiguous sense, but want meaning like for long-term sustainability, this is what I think is best. The protocol likely wants to hang out below peg for maybe a couple seasons, maybe a couple days, and really flush out the weak hands that are too scared and that are likely going to go at some point in the future anyways. So when there is a deviation below peg, there's actually a really interesting time element here around when to incentivize converts and whether to incentivize them at all. And I think it's likely that the optimal incentive structure will be to incentivize converts only after some period of time has elapsed, such that it looks like the outflows from the system have stopped.
That actually makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Okay, see here. I don't know how to pronounce them. Sikarakaya. I'm gonna need an alliteration, an enunciation, however I'm supposed to pronounce it. It would be great if you could drop that somewhere, sir, so in the future I can address you with the respect that I would like to. Just asking, wouldn't it be nice decreasing the temp and adding a bit more? I have so many TradFi guys around. Payment, they heard 800% rate. I mean, this is a really interesting behavioral question. On the one hand, yeah, perhaps counterintuitively, lower interest rates may be better. And I'm particularly keen on seeing what happens now that we have a lot of oil, whether the temp is able to come down to a reasonable rate. And I think if that does happen, that will be really good for the health of the protocol. However, one of the core principles underneath the model is that the market knows best. And it's really impossible to expect to be able to just set the interest rate and expect the market to just follow it. So there's been chatter about a maximum temperature. I think anything like that really does compromise integrity of the ability of the model. Maybe integrity of the ability. It's a little verbose, but definitely compromises something in terms of the protocol's ability to borrow under all conditions. I think you look at something like Beanstalk, and I think the temp is at something like 30,000. It's like that seems totally unsustainable. So there definitely comes a point where the temperature is probably counterproductive. But what that point is, I think very hard to know. And at least at this stage of the I think it would be jumping the gun to oppose some sort of change. So maybe we get to a point where, this has been done enough that we can all generally come to some sort of agreement. Yeah, there's no need to offer interest rates more than 1,000 or than 3,000. God knows. But I don't think we have the data for that just yet. So I appreciate what your TradFi friends are thinking. Like, how could this possibly be? But on the other hand, an 8x on your capital for something so risky and experimental and early stage feels totally reasonable. So, yeah. I see a follow-up. Maybe we can lower the temperature faster while minting. Well, my hope is that so far we have really not seen the morning auction do its thing. And one of the hopes of this change to the amount of soil available is that through tremendously decreased available, the hope is to, for the first time, have soil selling somewhat regularly, and through that selling out, actually have the morning auction function. And through that auction, hopefully we'll be able to discover what the right temperature is. But the reality is that if there is excess demand for soil and people are competing, then I think there's a valid argument that you don't even need to lower the temperature. You could say that, well, if you lower the temperature, you might even be able to, still attract this competition at lower interest rates. And to that, I would say, great. Like, once we start to get data on how the activity is happening during the morning auction, maybe we can have the temperature, change as a function of the demand during the morning auction. Like, if the temp is at 800, but over the course of a week, all the soil was sown between 1 and 200%, maybe the protocol can read that and adjust the temperature down significantly. But for now, I feel like it's already pretty good in the sense that the Dutch auction should allow for, in practice, the temperature that the protocol is paying to be pretty close to what the market rate would be in an efficient context. But I think that we can do a lot better on this front. It's just a question of limited dev resources and have to pick and battles. And right now we still haven't even seen the morning auction in effect. So figure it's better to see that start to out before to take this model, if that makes sense. And appreciate you saying I can call you C. I feel a little bit slight sadness that you don't think I can handle the presentation, but I'll take what I can get.
Hey, Ben, I got a question.
Hit me.
I don't know if I'm going to phrase this well, but I'll do my best. If I understood some of the statements you were making earlier, you were hypothesizing that the reason why Pinto depegged like over an extended period of time, where after the first growth cycle, we sort of hung out around $1 and then, saw this depeg down to 70 cents, as if, compared to Beanstalk, where immediately after the growth cycle, it looked like the first growth cycle, it looked like the price of bean sort of dipped to 24 cents immediately. Do you see that as a inefficiency? Like, wouldn't it be better for the protocol to sort of depeg quickly and for all of those who want to exit at a lower price and then to recover as opposed to, bleeding value closer to the dollar value peg?
Well, this is sort of an unknowable question because it is a function of how much supply there is, like how much money was going to leave the protocol. It's not knowable. So if the protocol grew to 18 million and only $1 million was ever going to leave the system, then I would make the argument that pretty obviously there should be no DPEG. Protocol is 28 million of liquidity, L2SR is super high. Like, why would the protocol DPEG at all? And so from that perspective, it's like you sort of need the future information about the extent of the outflow in order to be able to play this perfect. And the thing is, the outflow is not deterministic. The outflow is a function of the performance of the protocol over time. And so this is where there is no right answer here. And instead, what you would sort of, I guess, hope for in an ideal circumstance is, the music stops, the minting stops. And then you would sort of hope that pretty soon thereafter, that the larger participants that were going to leave would leave pretty quickly. And in doing so, effectuate a DPEG. So the fact that that didn't happen immediately, it's like, well, the stock incentives definitely make it such that that is, what you're incentivized to do. And so then I would look at that and I would say, well, the conclusion is that most of the capital left wasn't sure whether they would stay or go. And the protocol ultimately was not able to retain that capital based on its performance. And to that, you may say, well, yeah, therefore it should have just depegged and forced these people out. But I don't really see a way to make that happen. There's sort of a need to let the thing actually play itself out every cycle. So on the one hand, yeah, you definitely want like an immediate depeg after a pump and flush out those weak hands at the lowest price possible. I think based on what we saw, most of the hands were not weak, but they weren't strong, medium hands. And this is where we saw like pretty, steady outflows over time where they were waiting. Is this thing going to mint again? All right. And this happened in progression until, one of the larger holders left in basically, I think, a single transaction. And that really did depeg the system in a major way for the first time. And then we saw more outflows. So hard to get that right is the truth. There is no right answer because of the non-determinism of the user behavior. Or the indeterminism? I think non-determinism. And I would also argue that like that was a great demonstration of utility. That there were millions and millions of dollars that were able to leave the system at the value target. And it's like that actually makes the incentives around participating in a bank run quite different. Like, oh, actually, maybe I don't need to run. A lot of people were able to leave even if they didn't leave. So I think there's a lot there.
I'm curious if you have any anecdotes come to mind from the old withdrawal window in Beanstalk and seeing maybe not you, but like when the market saw users attempting to withdraw that had to wait, did that influence? I guess converts may not have been live at the time, but additional selling prior to, or additional, I guess you wouldn't be able to exit sooner. Sorry, I don't know. This is a fully formed out thought, but just yeah, just thinking about how a withdraw time period may impact that ability to call that information into the present. Maybe I'll ponder on this more and then ask a more fully formed question. Thanks.
Well, I'm happy to share what comes to mind, even if it may not be directly related, but I think it is. I think originally there was like a 24 season withdrawal period or something. And the result, ultimately the protocol really wants your volume in and out. And the problem that sort of manifested huge overhang is people would withdraw and then everyone else would see people withdrawing, but the price wouldn't reflect it. And I'm kind of making it up, but I do that the nature of the bank runs felt like they were a bit exacerbated by this dynamic where people could start to see all this outflow basically building up but not leave yet, versus in the current model to just people can leave instantly and then you're sort of right back to an equilibrium, even if that equilibrium is at a lower price. That's a healthier way for the system to function as opposed to, this build-up period where people can see like we're no longer at equilibrium, but the system hasn't reached its new equilibrium yet, if that makes sense. That was just inefficient.
Thanks for sharing.
Okay, so we're at the 80-minute mark here. Let's see if we have one or two more questions. And just want to try to be, for me, I think the goal is to do these often. And so I think maybe a better way to do it is not go 3 hours, but to just do it very frequently. So that's where I currently sit. If people feel like it's better to just do 3 hours straight and do it less frequently, I'm open to that. But from where I sit, I think better to do this constantly and in slightly shorter. Not that an hour and a half is so short, but that's where I sit. So I don't know if anyone else has anything else they want to throw out.
Hey guys, this is not a question, but more of maybe like a suggestion. I think it would be cool if we could form maybe some sort of an index, like a Pinto index, or even just like Pinto, and then compare it with the other assets. So, like $100 in this Pinto index or in the Pinto BTC compared with $100 in BTC, and we can show the comparison and differences and how one reacts to the volatility versus the other. Maybe something like this could be a little bit cool, just to show how the protocol runs and absorbs the volatility of volatile assets.
I think that would be great. I think people are not appreciating how powerful the system already is. This to me is one of the great tragedies of the stablecoin meme. Like, stablecoins don't exist. They're not possible. Or maybe if they are possible, they're coins. They're not money. Like, you want stable money? That doesn't exist. So to the extent that we can show people, like, this protocol has mechanisms, incentive designs that allow it to be significantly less volatile than any of the other cryptocurrencies that exist. I think that's really powerful and a powerful story that we should be doing a lot more to tell. What else, folks? Going once, going twice. Oh, I see something just came in the chat. Captain says, C's point, as I understand, is lowering the temperature quicker would scare potential users less and create more competition, as Dutch auction seems not to be efficient without new users. Understandable that dev resources are limited and this might not be seen as a priority, but this might actually be an important negative influence on new users, as people would expect this to be paid back far in the future. Lowering the temperature quicker would scare potential users less. Yeah, I mean, I think I am. Or at least I feel like the answer that I gave speaks to why we should not just arbitrarily temperature. Just to say that to pick and choose something like that really takes away from the idea that the market knows best. And at present, the market has not decided to lend to the even at the almost 900% temperature. So I think hopefully if the significantly less amount of soil is available, that should naturally lead to the temp coming down because the soil is selling out. I think what might be better to try to address this is to change the way that the temperature or the magnitudes in which the temperature goes up and down. I think perhaps it should move up a lot slower than it currently does, and move down faster, as C suggested. But hard to know optimal here. Yeah, Mochan Pinto says, the way I see it, people are still Pinto on shaking ground in terms of risk. So the market has decided is 800%. I think that's totally reasonable. And to me, an 800% return on a bet that the protocol is going to grow to, call it, right now 10 million market cap, 32 million pod line, basically double 64 plus 10. So the bet is that the protocol is going to grow to 75 million. I think it's totally reasonable that we need a 9 plus in order to make that bet with no time horizon on the repayment. So to me, it's like, I think it's a little bit, not to get ahead of ourselves, but I think it's, let's have faith in the market. The market does know best, almost always. So I think, I'm very interested in seeing how this plays out. I'm not in dictating to the market what the efficient interest rate is. Peg Maintenance Man, I see you unmuted, but I can't hear you. All right, I see some people typing in the chat. C says, if the temp will be 1,500% instead of 874 next hour, do you think people will sow in great numbers? Definitely not. This is why the temperature increased, but perhaps increasing it even more slowly, would have a positive effect. Captain says, why were the rates of beanstalk changed then? I don't understand the question, sir.
I think he's pointing out that, while we don't choose the temperature for the reasons you described, ultimately some rates of increase and decrease do have to be chosen. It's like, how do you square what you're saying with respect to the fact that the market decides and that there do have to be, some magnitude changes?
Well, assuming that's the question, it's like, it's just a question of discovery. So there is some market rate. There is some market rate that is the rate at which people will lend to the protocol. And the question is, how can the protocol find that rate? And in particular, the way in which the protocol finds that rate, how does that contribute to the game theory around lending to the protocol? So it's like, you could imagine a circumstance where if nobody lends to the protocol, the temperature immediately skyrockets to 1,000% or to 10,000%. And then assuming someone sows at 10,000%, now it cuts it to 20%. And no one sowed at 20%. All right, back to 9,000%. There's a lot of different ways to discover the efficient, the market rate, if you will. The current strategy is to check, based on the current demand, whether the temp is too high or too low, and then change it slightly. So it's pretty simple. I think there's potentially better ways to discover it. I think seeing activity in the Dutch auction, in the morning auction, will potentially provide us with a new tool to determine how to decrease the temperature if it's too high. And, I still think we probably don't want to the circumstances where the temp can skyrocket because of C's point, which is, if the temp will double to 1,500 next hour, like, who's going to sow at 8%, even though 800% sounds great. So it's a very interesting thing to try to get right. All right, we've done 90 minutes. Does anyone have any final things they want to talk about before we wrap up here? And I will be back soon. Austin, do you know what day? When is our next one?
I don't yet, but I think we want to make these consistent so people can expect to come to a discussion at a particular time. But
Right.
TBD.
Maybe Monday or something. I can't wait much
Sure.
longer. I'm having too much fun.
I'm glad.
All right, folks. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions. I hope this was helpful and informative. And we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, everyone.